Hi, today we're continuing working on our city landscape and one-point perspective. On the right-hand side of the screen, I have a city landscape with a slightly different one-point perspective, but it's going to allow me to focus on something that a lot of people have expressed interest in, and that is how to create a sign that is accurate to the rules of perspective. So I'm going to add a sign to this building right here, and I'm looking at the building that says pizza on the right hand side over there, and notice how it is angled back to the vanishing point. So the letters that are closest to the vanishing point, the P and the I, are shorter than the A at the other end. So I'm going to turn that first building on my street right here into a Pizza Hut. In order to do that, first of all, I need to anchor my ruler at the vanishing point. So a lot of times you'll see me put down my pencil at the vanishing point, and in this instance I'm going to go above the building. So let me move my pencil and reposition my ruler so it lets me create an angle back here. Now, part of the reason I chose to make this building my Pizza Hut is because the angles are very extreme. The angles turn down very sharply, and you'll see why that is in just a minute. So, first of all, I left myself room to write the words Pizza Hut, and that's why I put down this first line. So as I create my words Pizza Hut, my vertical lines are still vertical. Notice how my letters get larger as I move away from the vanishing point. Just like the bricks got larger, the side of the windows furthest away from the vanishing point all gets larger. But vertical lines stay true to the vertical lines on the graph paper. Now, you don't have to name that building Pizza Hut. This is just one example. And now we all know that Pizza Hut has a red sign that has sort of a trapezoid on it. So this line is going to be for the top of my trapezoid, and then it comes down on the vertical just slightly, and then angles back out. It's kind of like a hat if you think about it. Again, I do recommend you use your ruler for any straight lines you're drawing. You're going to be far more successful. And so that first building is going to be my Pizza Hut. Let me do a short vertical line to mark where the end of my sign is right there. And I marked the end of my sign down here. So there's my Pizza Hut. I like the way that turned out. That looks very realistic. Now, sometimes you may just want to start by putting in a rectangle for a sign. For instance, on this brick building right here, I'm going to add a sign up there, and let's create a rectangular sign because Pizza Hut is a very unusual kind of sign. So again, I'm going to anchor my pencil on the vanishing point, and then at the top of that building, I'm going to create a space for that sign. And for any vertical letters on my sign, I need to follow the vertical lines on the graph paper. But notice how my letters are going to get larger from the side that's closest to the vanishing point to my side that's furthest away from the vanishing point. And some people have expressed interest in creating an apartment building. However, the picture here on the right-hand side of the screen has an apartment building, and it's just called apartment. And I've suggested that we come up with some more creative names, maybe names that we've seen around us in the real world. So I think that apartment building I'm going to call Lincoln Commons. So hopefully you'll see that I tried to keep my vertical lines true to the vertical lines on the graph paper. My letters get larger from the vanishing point side of the sign to the right hand side of the sign. As with most kinds of signs, I did add an illustration. I added a rough sketch of a flower, and I also added in something that you would see commonly on an apartment lease sign, which is first month free. I add one more thing here because I don't like that empty space in between. So I'm just going to add another ornament to my sign. Notice how I tried to keep it oriented vertically. So the last thing I want us to work on today is how to add some other buildings into the background, because a lot of people have pointed out that inside of a real city you would see taller buildings in the city back behind these buildings. So I'm going to add some buildings here on the left-hand side. They're a little bit taller. Let me get out another sketch we've been looking at as an example. This sketch is by a local high school student, and she's in 11th grade, and she's done some really great details, but one of the things that I'd like for my 5th graders to see is how you can continue to expand upon this basic concept we're learning about perspective drawing later on in your school career. Also on that left-hand side of the street, I want to change the height of a couple of my buildings. I want to change this building and make it a little bit shorter. Right now all my buildings are the same height, and I want to break up that skyline. You'll notice even in her drawing right here, she started by creating a line of perspective that gave her a general height for all of her buildings, but then she added in some angled roofs and some things to break up the skyline. So I'm going to try to do that now. First of all, I'm going to make this building a little bit shorter just by erasing this line. And when I make this building shorter, I also need to show the top edge of that building. With a pretty short line. Something else that you can see from that example is that where most of the buildings end, the artist has really darkened the lines, so it's easy to tell where that building is separate from all of the details around it. So I just wanted to darken some of those lines. And then this building right here next to it, I think I'm also going to shorten that building a little bit. So I find my vanishing point, put my ruler on it, and find a new line that's going to show us where the top of that particular building is, and erase the line that was previously marking the top of it. So now you see we've got some different levels that break up our line of perspective. I also need to add in another line like this to show where the top of that building is. And for that, I'm using the horizontal lines on the graph paper. That looks much better. Now that city street has more distinguished buildings and different roof heights. So what I want us to look at is this building right here and this building right here. These were done simply by creating rectangular prisms in perspective, and we started doing that before we began drawing this entire landscape to help us practice how does this work. And notice the artist added on some lines to suggest windows, but she did not take time to draw all of these individual windows like we see on the closer buildings. Those buildings are further away, so they have less detail. So what we're going to start by doing is putting in the rectangular face that marks the end of that building, and then we're going to add in the lines of perspective and then decide where to cut that building off with another vertical line. So really I need 2 vertical lines to start me off. So that's the end of that tall building. Like the end of this building, it looks like a real rectangle. It's not in perspective. The side of the building will be using the rules of perspective. So I have to line up with my vanishing point, come up to the top corner of that building, and that's where the side of that building is going to be. So instead of drawing that line all the way to the VP, I took it as far as I wanted to go, and now I'm going to add in the vertical line that marks the end of that building. Then if you'd like to add in some windows, you just continue with some lines. Always using the vanishing point as your point of reference. And I'm just going to quickly estimate distances, trying to space them out fairly evenly. I'm not going to turn these into bricks. You wouldn't see that kind of detail at this distance. I'm thinking these are each floor of that very tall building. It might be a row of windows, or it just might be the steel framework of the building that marks where that floor ends. And then once you come to this side of it, you get back on the horizontal lines of the graph paper. And I'm just matching those to my angled lines on the side. That's what happens when you don't use your ruler. Use that ruler. It's the best tool you have to make a successful perspective drawing. Great, I'm pretty pleased with that building. Now I think I'd like to add another tall building to the left of that one. So I'm going to do the same process again. I'm going to come down here, add in the rectangle that is the end of that building. Use the vertical lines on the graph paper to help construct it. Then line up with my vanishing point to do this side of that building. And then when I decide I want to end that building, I'm using the vertical lines of my graph paper as a frame of reference so I can get those vertical lines to be very parallel. And then again, if I wanted to add in floors or windows, I can do the same thing. Use my vanishing point, rotate, vanishing point, rotate. So that's a pretty simple way to add in some other buildings that could be taller in that city. I think before I finish my drawing, I'm going to add in one more very tall building like that on the right-hand side of the street. This one's going to be pretty large. Then I'll just anchor to my vanishing point to help me find the line that is going to mark the top edge of that building. Take it as far as I want to go, and then go vertical again to show where that building ends. So I have 1, 2, 3 vertical lines that are all parallel, one horizontal line that marks the top edge, and then one line of perspective that marks that side edge. Let me add in a few rows of floors on this building. Anchoring on my vanishing point. Anchor on the vanishing point, rotate. Anchor on the vanishing point, rotate, anchor on the vanishing point, rotate. Now the last thing I want to do before I complete my sketch and move on to coloring is just go back and darken some of my lines so that it's easier to see. You know, we started this sketch by drawing very, very lightly, and that made it easier to erase. But now that we've identified where we want all of those elements to be at, it's pretty important that you go back and darken at least where the ends of those buildings are. Maybe where the top is right here, so that they don't fade away or you don't get confused when you start adding color. Same thing with the sidewalk here, the very front edge of the buildings. So I'm just going right over the line I've already created and putting a lot of pressure on my pencil. Some people have expressed an interest in putting lines down your road. You want to put lines down your road. Remember, usually the lines down the center of the road are white. And also, they would get longer and wider from this distant point to this point in the front. So I'm not even going to put any lines on my road because I think it's going to be confusing and challenging. I am darkening up some of my lines though, so it's easier to see where my doors are, where the fronts of my buildings are. Like I did on these windows right here, I'm going to add in a little bit of the window frame on this side, just by doing a double thickness of line. Just like there's a double thickness here. And of course, as we look up at these windows, we might be able to see part of the top of the window frame. Great, now I think I'm ready to add in some color. Of course, if you want to, you could add in another sign. I just did a couple of signs as a quick example. I think signs are confusing a lot of people. Actually, I'm going to do one more sign on this building right here, and then I'll be done. And that sign is going to be for a Foot Locker. So something you might want to think about is giving yourself space for each one of those letters by planning it out before you start. So I'm going to start with my smallest letter and go to my largest first. So I'm going to work backwards. Notice how my letters are getting larger and wider, but my vertical lines still follow the vertical lines on the graph paper. And I suggest you do this really, really lightly. That way, if you need to erase to give yourself more space or to make it look more accurate as you're increasing the size of those letters, it's real easy to erase. So notice I'm still obeying the rules of perspective with the angle of my horizontal parts, but my vertical letters still follow those vertical lines. You might want to add some thickness so they look more like block letters. Most signs you ever see will be constructed using block letters. And then, of course, the letters get thicker as they move away from you. And then I might try to accent that sign a little bit with some darker lines that set it apart from the rest of the building front. I can't wait to see how your city landscape in one-point perspective turns out.